Hello and welcome to today's video. Today we're gonna talk about the new unit that dropped last patch, the Void Eye, and we will take a look at both the stats and the techs, how to use it in a game, and also about the recent performance in the tournament and the pick rate, the whole shebaz in the end. First of all, let's take a look at its stats. So the Void Eye has 844 base health, which is one of the lowest health values in the game regarding the total unit size, which is 3. For example, a Hound unit has 897, so it's way tankier because it's 2 more models and having a very similar stat line in terms of the rest. Something else it has comparable to the doggies is also the base movement speed. They are a little bit slow. The Void Eye is even slower. It's on par with stuff like the early game, the Marksman. Arclight is a little bit faster, but they're rather slow and they cannot chase stuff very well. And there is not really a upgrade that fixes that itself without actually changing the unit entirely, which we will talk about later. For now, we will just talk about the base stats and how we can augment them with the additional benefits. So the next thing would be the damage, and we can see straight away 1412 damage. That's a lot. That's a lot for a 100 cost unit that would actually perform rather decently against everything that has a medium-sized HP pool, like sledgehammers, like dogs, for example, can one-shot them in one go. Even steel balls, fire badgers, all the stuff that does not like getting DPS'd, but also has some trouble getting to their targets. Now, if we're talking about damage, we also have to talk about the attack interval. It's 3.5, so very reminiscent in that case of a Sabertooth, which is 3.4 now, since the latest buff. And also in a similar class to what the Phoenix does, 3.2. That being said, a Phoenix has almost 3k damage, so it's pretty much double of what a Void Eye has, but it also has double the cost. So in terms of attacking and whatnot, it should be pretty competitive even when compared to a Phoenix, because we could buy 2 of these units for a Phoenix pack, and that would mean we would gain 3 times that value and then some by 2. So in terms of damage, it actually outperforms the Phoenix, and that should be something interesting for us to see, because that would be one of the comparisons later, especially when we're talking about techs. But for now, let's just say the main selling point of the Void Eye, in my opinion, would be the base damage. And the attack interval also means that it's going to be pretty bad against everything like crawlers, fangs, wasp, mustang, all those units that have multiple units in a squad, and way better against little targets like the hacker, for example. They can kill a hacker in one go if they ever would connect. Now, these units are divided here because we will talk about their matchups a little bit, but for now let's just say that should be a main selling point. Another downside and upside would be the base movement speed, the 8. Compared to the Phoenix, that's obviously very slow, so it falls into the same category of the Marksman. If they are out of position, they might not be where they need to be anytime soon. Harder for you to push with them because of that fact. Also a upside for you, because a Phoenix will get in front of units rather quickly with the 60 movement speed, whereas the Void Eye will stay behind enemy lines. The only thing is, the Void Eye doesn't have the greatest base range, which is 90. Now, if we compare that to the rest of the units on this board, especially the early versions, it outranges Fangs by a little bit. It outranges Tarantula by a little bit. So all the short-range units, it does outrange by a tiny amount, which probably doesn't amount to much. And everything else, like the Arclight, like the Marksman, Phoenix, they all have higher base range and will make it hard for the Void Eye to actually make contact with what it's trying to do. There's very little in this game that can actually get outranged and also countered. For example, a steel ball base range is 45, so you have a decent difference there, but it's also a pretty fast moving unit. A badger, for example, is a little bit slower, but it has 60 speed. So I will keep them on this side because we can kill them, but it's not going to be that easy. The faster the unit, the worse it gets for the Void Eye. They are a glass cannon unit, and glass cannon units always like staying out of range and having some buffer in between. Now, talking about splash, there's no splash at all. So this is single target DPS, 3 targets at a time because of the unit size, but just single target in terms of 0 AoE. The attack for now is ground only. There's an option to get air, but that requires upgrades, and thus we will not talk about this until we discuss attacks. In terms of cost, it's just 100. So the unit is inherently not so much gated by its cost, but more can you get enough deploys out to make it efficient enough, or do you waste too much time not building chaff and chaff clear? It's the same thing as with marksman, also a unit that does perform well if you have a lot of them on the board with XP, but not so much a problem of getting them in terms of money, but instead the deploys are often hard to get. So probably something to watch out if you want to see a deploy, additional deployment card or something similar, or maybe a unit drop where you would pick the Void Eye. Otherwise, getting them on the board might be difficult without tanking too much tempo. And since this unit is a specialist, it needs support by chaff and chaff clear, because it does not do any of these things for now without any upgrades. Right, so talking about the base stats, it's probably good to talk about the early game matchups first. So early game matchup would include other chaff, DPSler, and the normal guys like marksman and arclight who will show up early. I think all of these units on this side here for now are units that deal pretty well with the Void Eye, and that is either because they can outrange them or they can one-shot them. They don't get one-shot themselves. They're flying, so for now we can't hit any flying units, so we get countered automatically by all of them. And also units that can chew through them with high DPS and high splash. So the Typhoon, for example, would even outrange this unit at its base stats, and also does a good amount of damage and targets all of them pretty fast. Same goes for Arclight with splash, can outrange them and outscale them. Not by much, but it's enough to not get one shot and also deal with them in the process. Farseer and so on, just too tanky. The Hacker is an interesting one, and I said in theory it can get one shot, but in practicality the range of the Hacker is higher, so he will hack the target immediately, since these guys have very low base HP. Any Hacker can kill them very, very fast. And once he hacks one of them, they will never get to the Hacker in the first place. So for now, the Hacker stays on this side of the board, because upgrades can change this matchup, but they can also worsen the matchup, depending who has the upgrades. Other than that, it's the big heavy hitters like Vulcan, too hard to burst and easy to kill. The Void Eyes, the Vulcan has a similar range to them, just 5 more, and does massive amount of splash damage. So he's gonna kill both the Protectors and the Void Eyes themselves rather quickly if they stay on the ground. What we like them for is, for example, a Melting Point. A Melting Point is over efficient at killing units like these. He doesn't need the damage output, which is his biggest upside. He doesn't want to target them. It's none of his business. Hounds have the big downside of getting one-shot by Void Eyes, which they don't like. One of their selling points is not getting one-shot, actually, in the early game. Same with Sledgehammer. The Sledgehammer has a high HP pool, doesn't have the highest base damage. So 608 base damage means he can't one-shot a Void Eye. And that will mean that the Sledgehammer will shoot its second shot after the Void Eyes all have shot. So they will destroy Sledgehammers rather efficiently and very early in the game, which is something that is not happening very often. I think that's one of the selling points if we're talking about starting units. Same goes for the Steel Balls, because the Steel Balls also require a lot of damage. And this unit does not rely on its health pool, but it will struggle a little bit more against Steel Balls since they overall just are more tanky than the Sledges, but they have one model less. So I would say it's fine. The Sabertooth, also a starting unit, very high HP pool, so a perfect target for the Void Eye because we don't need splash, we need high DPS. We have 3 units in a pack, so they will deal some damage to the Sabertooth, but in the end, it's only a support matchup. They deal a lot of damage and you can have them early for that job, but they will not win one-on-one. This is not a one-on-one comparison, just a efficiency-wise. Rhino, also a unit that requires a lot of damage in the early game to stop. So something that would need a Hacker, Phoenix, or something like this, even Fortress. So what I can maybe fit the bill here and stop a early Rhino if there is, for some reason, one on the board. I might be getting in trouble when it hits level 2, when it hits the 40k mark. But up until then, I think it's a decent solution. And the very same goes for the Sandworm. It is a giant that does not want to get shot by these Void Eyes. The Void Eyes low range is not an issue against the worm, because it will get in your face disregardless. But they will still need units that peel for them to make them efficient at killing it. But point for point, credit for credit, they probably will do pretty fine without getting outranged or anything like that. So as we can see here in the base matchup, that doesn't look too pretty. And that also would make me say I would probably not want this as a starting unit, but maybe I would like it as an option if I see these 3 units or 4 units in the first round. Maybe. Just in terms of matchup. The next thing we will take a look at is the techs. For example, the Void Eye can get a range enhancement. And as soon as range enhancement is clicked, a lot of these matchups get better. For example, the Hacker matchup goes way up. If the Hacker doesn't have range for some reason, the Scorpion matchup also gets way better. The Typhoon matchup actually changes a lot because the Typhoon does not have a ability to get range at all. However, it has the ability to get a shield, and at that point it might be difficult to break through. But for now we will say it will be an up trade in that case. Range does not do more against the Mustang Fang combo here, but it will allow the Void Eyes to peel themselves off the front line and stay behind other units if they have to. With 130 range, they will be mixed in with Mustangs, for example. Mustang has 135, but 130 and 135 will mean that they will stay near each other. Nobody will get in the front or in the back. They will obviously stay behind Fangs and whatnot, and generally speaking, probably a necessary upgrade as soon as you realize you're getting targeted and your front line simply is outranging yourself, which is a problem for the Void Eye. Then we have the second one is Energy Shield. Energy Shield means the survivability of the unit is pretty much doubled, or more than doubled, because they can't get one shot anymore. On the other hand, it's rather expensive at 300, and 300 for a unit that has very low base HP and probably is gonna die if they get targeted, just regardless of shield or not. So. I think the shield makes the most sense against matchups like the Phoenix, so other high damage single target DPS units. Maybe against stuff like the Phantom Ray, Marksman for sure, and the other matchups usually don't care about another hit. usually that would just mean you will die. There will be an interaction with another tech we will talk about later, but for now, let's say it's not going to make such a big difference in those cases. Same goes for the steel balls, for the fire badges, or the DPS units that don't fire as much. For example, a sledgehammer or a saber-tooth also would struggle a little bit against the shield, but I don't think that's too valuable because in the early game you will not click shield for this unit, and as such it's questionable if it is worth taking on the bar for now, I would say. The next one is charge shot. Increases attack by 175%, but also increases attack interval by 25, which is not that much. It's 3.5 base to 4.4. So I would say a very good trade-off, because it has the same damage increase that the charge shot of the Phoenix has. So their DPS main selling point is now even higher. But the downside is we're getting even into worse matchups when the Hound comes in if there's multiple units in the squad. Unless we can one-shot them with the base 3800, we will struggle. So say sledgehammers will get one-shot by this unit immediately. Steel balls, for the other hand, will still take 2 shots, and it will increase the overall reload time. So it will make them more efficient at killing saber teeth and rhinos and all the big HP pool units for sure, but not necessarily with the mid-sized or more than 4 or 5 units. In those cases, it would probably increase the time to kill unless it's a one-shot any time. Now, the last one is where it gets interesting. It's aerial mode. So this means the Void Eye will turn into a flyer. That means the base movement speed is increased by 3 and the ranged is reduced by 10, which is quite relevant because, as we were talking about, a bunch of these matchups are pretty close. And in air battles, usually the higher range wins. So if we're talking about overlords, so for example, the base overlord has the same range as a Void Eye with range and aerial mode. The Raiden will actually have less range, but it's not by much. It can still hit range enhancement, and it can also hit the chain or fork upgrade and still outrange the Void Eye, which is pretty terrible because both of these units are pretty much very good against the Void Eye already, and they will one-shot the entire pack unless it's shielded. That would be actually a reason to pick up the shield, but at this point it's getting very, very expensive to do anything. This also means that the Fortress can counter them with the anti-air barrage because their HP pool is still tiny. It doesn't change anything about that. So the Fortress is able to deal with them in both cases. Even though they have very high DPS to bring the Fortress down, it's still probably a little bit too slow and they're too squishy to actually make that work. Now, in terms of Wraith, also a very important matchup. If you are a light air unit, the Wraith is probably one of your banes. 100 range versus 120. It's pretty close. I would argue, though, that the Wraith with 400 base attack is very dangerous against Void Eyes, even if they are pretty high level. But it's somewhat level dependent. But the range differences are not really that high. They are okay at best, I would say. In terms of Typhoon matchup, if he ever clicks area spec, the range will be higher than the Void Eye. So in combination with mechanical rage and all that stuff, it can actually counter them still, even if they take to the air. And that should be considered when facing Typhoons. They are, generally speaking, I think, a pretty good unit to hunt down Void Eyes and finish them quickly as soon as the front line falls. In terms of Mustangs, we know Mustangs will outrange them if they have area spec. So they will kill the Void Eye disregardless of just range or area spec, both will outrange and they will immediately kill them if they ever hit the area spec. Now Wasp is a little bit more interesting because the Wasp has a base range of 50, so it's actually getting outranged quite a lot, but it also has 12 units in a group, so it's inherently not a good target. It also has shield available, and then the worst part is once they hit range, they go up to 90, and with area spec, they go up to 120, which matches the Void Eye. And since the Void Eye is so squishy with 844, the Wasp, with the additional damage from area spec, can almost two-shot them. And there's a pretty high chance that you will get killed off even if you're ahead in levels against Wasp, since their DPS is high enough to two-shot or three-shot them, at least in the early game. The Phoenix will always be on par with range and will outrange them as soon as he drops a range enhancement. The only reason why he wouldn't is because he has charge shot. So I would say this is pretty much a draw. Whoever has shield wins for sure. And other than that, the Void Eye has to be in an upgrade advantage. Otherwise, they will lose to the Phoenix, regardless of what upgrades they pick, because the Phoenix can match their profile. These things are very much reminiscent of a Phoenix overall. The Phantom Ray is a little bit funny one, because as soon as it hits Stealth Cloak, the Void Eye has a big problem, because it's going to get one-shot by the 1k base damage. And on the other hand, the Phantom Ray also has a shield if you run that on your bar, and it also could get range by picking the extended range card if you are a mad guy that does that, but they can actually match them both in range and damage and all the good stuff, although for a higher price point. Now, in terms of matchups that are positively changed by charge shot or area mode, basically everything that is on the ground, like the Scorpion, like the War Factory and all that stuff, falls immediately off. Crawlers too, Arc Lights if they don't have anti-air equipped. So a bunch of matchups here that usually counter them get better, but as you can see, it's not too many. It would be 1, 2, 3, maybe 4, 5, 6, 7. Maybe 8, maybe not. Depends on the upgrade. Then, last but not least, the Void Eye has additional tags, and they are also unique, which is very interesting to me, because unique tags usually don't happen very often in Mechabellum. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And in this case, we have one we know already, which is energy absorption. And energy absorption in this case means we gain 60% more HP and convert damage dealt to HP. Now, usually this would be a pretty good upgrade. We know that from the melting point, for example. But the difference is a melting point has a 30,000 health pool. And a Void Eye has not even 1k base. So if we equip it, we get 1.3k HP, which is okay, but it's still very hard to stay alive because of the fire rate. The fire rate is that low that even a Mustang can chew through you, because while you are reloading your shot, you will lose HP too quickly and you will still die. If they are over leveled, just like Wasp, by the way, the anti-air barrage will not one-shot them, and other stuff that has a high attack interval as well, like the Raiden, for example. But as we can see in the Raiden example, it has 5.3k base damage, so he will never, even with energy absorption, be able to make that work. So in theory, I like the concept, but I cannot imagine a situation where it would be very, very impactful, because the unit base stats is too low to profit from this. Now, the next one is a very interesting one. It's suppression shots. So the Void Eye's attack reduces range on the target by 30% for 2 seconds. Now, reducing range by 30%. Very good. We all know smoke bomb and all the stuff that reduces range is usually very good. However, the duration, 2 seconds, is rather low. The units that care about this the most are things like the Melter, which is why he's on this side still. If you can get its range down by a little bit, it will immediately break their ability to target stuff far away and have to recharge their entire attack. Might also affect steel balls if they have range. If they don't, probably not as much. So everything that tries to ramp up. Hacker, for example, also very good target because they usually have very high range. So taking a third of that means they have to retarget and hack again. So everything that needs to be disrupted, very useful against. If not, 2 seconds means the other unit will get its range back and fire at you because there's a 1.5 second delay before the tech actually can reduce their attack range again. So this can be good if you want to drag units into your line. That's mainly the idea. Big downside is the Void Eye already has to target what it wants to target. And second of all, it has a very high base DPS. Usually you would want your Void Eyes to finish the job, not to be the supporting unit that does it. If you want that to happen, you need range. And a supporting unit that only works with range and another upgrade is rather expensive. The main selling point of a Void Eye is that it's super cheap. Adding attacks on top of that are expensive are most likely not going to be feasible over the long term. Can that be good? Of course, it can be nice against the big targets like the tarantulas or scorpions maybe that you can't just one-shot. And it can also sway around matchups like the Wraith where we can try to slow down the range so it comes closer and we can get off a second volley without dying. But that only pretty much works when we are capable of targeting it immediately and we also get the all the shots a little bit staggered. So that would be a good reason to deploy the Void Eyes this way. So we get a staggered shots into the enemy instead of getting them all at once. Since the debuff will not stack, it will only stay at 2 seconds maximum upon hitting. And this brings us directly to the last tech, and I think the most interesting tech, the electromagnetic armor. Now this means every unit that is attacking the Void Eye, or aka targeting and successfully hitting, in case of the hacker by the way, they will disable their own tech and reduce their movement speed by 40% for 5 seconds. So it's the normal EMAG effect on every other unit, but instead of applying it on hit, they apply it on getting hit. Now you might say that doesn't sound very nice for a unit that is so incredibly squishy, right? Because they usually would get one shot if something like that happens. But that's not entirely true. There is a bunch of units that have very high DPS overall, but low damage per hit. And those would be stuff like Mustangs, stuff like the anti-air barrage and all that stuff. They usually would get EMP'd by this. And even if our unit dies, they would still suffer the EMP effect. So this is very similar to the effect of the suppression shots, that we can drag targets towards us instead of having to go to them. Now famously, this also will break stuff like Fort Barrier, as long as the EMP effect lasts. So don't be confused, the anti-air barrage does not get countered by this upgrade, unfortunately, because it will still recharge while the fort is being EMP'd, and when it comes back online, the EMP effect will be long gone. So kind of questionable. So one of the uses this Void Eye unit has is just deploying it in front of a target that needs to be stopped. For example, a marksman. Getting the marksman to shoot the Void Eyes. It loses its range, moves forward, and can get killed by our let's say, Stormcaller or fire damage or something like that. Now, this is especially important, I think, for things like the hacker. A hacker getting its barrier deleted even for a few seconds and its range reduced even for a few seconds will usually mean that the hacker dies. So the Void Eye actually has a very good niche case scenario usage, I think, here with this armor against hacker. This will work even if the hacker has EMP himself, funny enough. So as soon as they are hit, the EMP will disable the hacker tech and he will not get his EMP effect, which is funny. Now, other units like the Farseer and all that stuff, they usually don't have such important techs that they need to get targeted by this. But basically everything that can't one-shot the Void Eye probably dislikes getting EMP'd. Even something like a worm. Getting EMP'd and losing 50% of your HP can mean that you die immediately. So this is a little funny thing you can do. You can drop Void Eyes because the DPS is decent against worms, and you can equip electromagnetic armor, and once their peel dies, they will still enable your other DPS units to kill the worm more easily and stop it from dividing itself into larvae and stuff like that. And the same is true for steel balls, getting their mechanical division off. All these targets that are hard to hit, but they should profit from getting EMP'd. Same with the melter. The melter hates getting EMP'd. It hates shooting at this unit. So I think melter is actually one of the least favorable matchups overall for the melter is the Void Eye, which I find pretty funny, but regarding its techs and all its abilities, it actually makes sense. And the worst case scenario is this EMP armor also can make them harder to hit because they also have the fly option. So you can actually make sure that they die to the correct targets by getting them up into the air. And that would not require any range or anything like that. You just need the electromagnetic armor and the flying ability together, which is decently expensive, but if you can shut down things like melter, multi-melter, it can be worth, I think, taking into if you are in a late game position and you need the support. So that's the overall impression of the what the Void Eye is capable of. Now, thinking about whether I want them in a pack early or not, that is highly dependent on the turn 1 of the opponent. And since we don't know what the opponent is starting with, I would argue that the greater amount of units that are here that perform well against them are also early game units. I would say I would not try to pick them in a pack. If I want them at a specific spot, not on turn 1, against the unit that I know is deployed on the opposite. That's going to be my opinion for now regarding the starter pack, and I wouldn't rate them very highly because they are barely functioning like chaff, and I think I would prefer the Hound for the same slot pretty much, even though they are a DPS unit, or supposed to be. However, that does not mean they are bad, they just need to be at the right spot. It's the same thing with Sabertooth Opener, but the big difference here is that the Sabertooth has a 15k HP pool, and our little guys here have a combined of almost 4k, but not quite. That is also susceptible to getting AoE damaged. So I'm not sure about that one. Now I'm gonna talk a little bit over some gameplay about the tournament, because usually people try to use these units and it's a pretty good indicator how the base unit works. For example, when the Raiden was released, it was doing very, very well. Too well, some would say, but it was a good indicator nonetheless. So we will take a quick look at some games and see how we perform and how the openers did perform.